Mais non.
Crispé le sourire.
Un petit café peut-être. C'est qui un café froid?
Ah non, attends.
Non, c'est pollution. Micro-waste immense. C'est bon, notre cotorette arrive à suivre?
Ouais, c'est bon.
Okay, here we go. So just behind you, you will have a progression bar, as you can see it. And at the end, for the last 2 minutes, you have the countdown.
Okay. On y va?
Yeah.
So welcome and good morning, everyone. Today, Marie-Camille, Juliette, Vincent, and I will talk to you about the waste observed in the Lérins archipelago. So first, we will get briefly through a general geographical introduction of the setting of the island. Then we will see some general facts about waste found in the sea. Then we will study what kind of waste do we find in the Lérins archipelago and see if we can observe a difference between the waste found in Lérins and what we should find in the Mediterranean Sea and at a global scale. Then we'll have a look at the spatial distribution of the waste on the island. And after that, we will also have a look at the temporal fluctuation of the waste observation over the years. And finally, Marie-Camille will talk to you about the impact of waste over the biodiversity in the island. So here's the map of the area. We've got the Lérins archipelago in the middle with the biggest island, Sainte Marguerite, just 1 kilometer short from Cannes here. And the second one, Saint-Honorat, a bit further south. The island is situated between the Gulf de Napoule and Gulf of Juan, with river bringing potential waste in the sea here. We've got also Cannes very close that can be also a source of waste. And the Courant Ligure, which is the main sea current in the area. So here are different ecosystems observed in the island with the famous Mediterranean Posidonia that cover large stretches of the seafloor. At deeper location, we also have coal indigenous formation. And finally, on land, we have typical Mediterranean vegetation with pine forest and marsh that are also important for birds. What are the different pressure undergoing on the archipelago? So first, we've got the very close proximity to Cannes. Then, of course, we've got the very strong maritime traffic because of Cannes and the very densely populated French Riviera littoral. And then, of course, the very strong seasonal touristic pressure on the island, with thousands of visitors going there each day during the summer. And some of them are going with private boats. So as we can see on the picture here, during the summer season, we can have like hundreds of boats between the island in the Canal de Frioul and around the two islands. So it brings a lot of pressure on the environment there. Globally, for the waste, we can say that in the world, in the ocean, 80% of the waste that we found are coming directly from the continent, and the remaining 20% are coming from offshore activities like boats and this kind of stuff. So about the type of waste, at the global scale, we have 80% of the waste that are composed of plastics. And we'll see later if the situation is the same in Lérins or not. Also, very strong importance for the sanitary waste at the global scale. Then why are we studying the waste here? Because waste are becoming more and more abundant in the ocean, and of course they have an impact on these ecosystems. We can of course have like animals ingesting the waste. Finally, it can kill these animals at the end. But also, especially for plastic, which are more than 80% of the waste found in the ocean, they can be decomposed by the UV, the wave, and winds into very small particles, the microplastic particles. And these particles have different capabilities. They can, for example, absorb chemical compounds. And when they get inside the trophic web, when they get eaten by animals, they can release this chemical compound and poison the trophic web. So, of course, it's a big issue. But also for the human activities such as tourism, it has a very strong impact. If you have to clean your beach for the tourists, you have to pay people to do that. You also have less tourists going to beach polluted, so waste for environmental and economic reason are becoming more and more a serious issue. So now we see what kind of waste we observe in the Lérins archipelago and see if whether or not there is a difference between this situation in Lérins and the one in the Mediterranean Sea and at a global scale. To do that, we perform a chi-square test. So here is the situation in the Mediterranean Sea, and this one is at the global scale. We compared the two, and there was no significant differences with a very high p-value, almost 1, so no difference. And then we compare it with what we observed during the Lérins project observation. And here, interestingly, there is a very significant differences with very small p-value. And what we observe is Lérins is a very high abundance of dead bodies. So dead bodies are like big waste, like for example anchors or fragment of shipworks. And this is very typical of Lérins, maybe because, as we've seen before, during the summer season and over the year, we've got a very high number of boats just anchoring around the island and in between the island. So it must be an explanation to why the difference, why we have a difference between Lérins and the Mediterranean Sea and the global scale. Now I will let you with Vincent that will talk to you about the spatial distribution of the waste in Lérins.
Okay, so this map gathers all the information of microplastic observed during the 5 years of observation. So this map doesn't take into account the number of plastic because when we are at sea, the operators only record if there is plastic or not and the nature of plastic, not the number of waste. So we can only observe the occurrence of waste with this map. Then we can see that there is a biggest amount of waste on the north of Sainte Marguerite, the biggest occurrence of waste. Then Juliette will explore the spatial repartition of this waste and with some tests.
So in order to test the repartition of waste in Lérins, we separated the station in 3 zones, as you can see there. In green, the north of Sainte Marguerite. In light blue, it corresponds to the interinsular zone. And finally, the dark blue corresponds to the south of Saint-Honorat. We performed the chi-square test in order to compare the distribution of stations where waste was observed in our 3 zones with the theoretical one, which can tell us that if the wastes are homogeneously distributed or not.
We're sorry about that.
Technical problem.
There's a lot of technical
No
problems
signal.
with this platform.
What's going on?
C'est bizarre.
It doesn't work anymore, it's just dropped.
On avait déjà eu le coup plein de fois quand il y avait des intervenants qui étaient
I'm really sorry about that.
Est-ce que l'un d'entre vous est connecté sur Marais Screen One, peut-être?
Ah ouais, c'est ça.
Windows Play.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that.
Est-ce que j'en étais? Okay. So I was speaking about the theoretical repartition of waste, and in fact, it corresponds to the number of observation of waste proportional to the size of the zone. The results show us that the repartition of waste in Lérins correspond to the theoretical one. So we can see that the repartition of waste is randomly distributed. Most of the wastes are found in the north of Sainte Marguerite and in between the islands. Thus, there is no significant difference between the distribution of stations expected to be affected by waste and the distribution of stations which are affected by waste and observed on our 3 zones. in fact, we expected a significant difference because we thought that the islands and so its distribution of waste will depend on factors such as winds, the weather, or even the touristic activities. So we can add to that the north of Sainte Marguerite is near Cannes. It's only 1 kilometer away, and we expected so much more waste coming from the coast. It's the same for the interinsular zone with its boats, many boats for the recreational activities. And so the third part is south of Saint-Honorat, where we were expecting less waste. But so we accept this conclusion, but with precaution, because of the bad weather experience in the 2015. It was just before the expedition. Moreover, we speak here, don't forget about the number of observation of waste in the station and not about the number of waste itself. And so, after testing the spatial variation, we wanted to know about the temporal variation. So, is there a year with more waste or not? When we looked at the data itself, we already saw that 2015 was the year with the most waste. So because of this, we were expecting to see more waste in 2015, and our indicative guess correspond to our hypothesis. Here is our box plot. Yes, it's a really weird box plot, but it corresponds, as you can see, to the number of observation for each station, so for each recorded type of waste, corresponding to the different years. And you can also notice an outlier, which we choose to keep. Even if it's influenced a lot our results, but it corresponds to the number of plastic experienced in 2015, which is almost the third of the observation. The ANOVA says that there is a significant difference between the numbers of stations where macro waste was observed in each year. This corroborates with our expectation. This difference can be explained by the bad weather in 2015 with a significant amounts of waste. Nevertheless, we must be careful while accepting this hypothesis because the power of our test is really limited since the non-parametric condition of the few data. We also observe the number of stations affected by waste and not the number of waste themselves, and we can also add the waste collection in 2016. So now we move to the last subject. Marie-Camille is gonna show you if these wastes have an impact on biodiversity or not.
Thank you. So we wanted to test the impact of these macro waste on the biodiversity in Lérins. So we did a student test to compare the average richness over 5 years in station without waste and in station with waste. As we can see on the box plot and the p-value, there was no significant difference between both, meaning that biodiversity is not impacted by the presence of macro waste in Lérins. So how can we have this conclusion? Probably because the macro waste, probably because the species we are studying in Lérins are really small fishes, and that's the one we observe. And the biggest threat related to the macro waste are entanglement, strangulation, or ingestion, which barely affect these little fishes. Nonetheless, there are many issues with waste, especially plastic, which represent a big part of the waste in the ocean, and in Lérins also. which are the degradation of the plastic into microplastics. These microplastics are little particles of plastics that can carry a lot of chemicals by absorption or desorption. And they are, as François said in the introduction, transferred all along the food web because these microplastics are bioaccumulated and they are not metabolized by the organisms. These microplastics provoke serious physiological issues that we can discuss later if you want. But to come back to our point on l'Hérens biodiversity, we can affirm that in l'Hérens, the biodiversity is not impacted by the presence of macro waste. However, we have to keep in mind that species observed are not the most potentially impacted by waste. Also, the regular waste collection might interfere with our results on maybe a long-term effect of the macro waste on the biodiversity. Also, the most dangerous waste, the macro waste, are not recorded in l'Hérens, so we cannot have a good idea of their presence, their number, or their impact in the biodiversity in l'Hérens. I'm moving to the conclusion with Vincent.
Thank you. So after analyzing the data collected for 5 years, we can conclude that we observed more dead bodies and plastic around the Lens than in the Mediterranean Sea or around the world. However, we were not able to determine exactly where those waste came from. And finally, we state that the microplastic do not impact the biodiversity around the Lens Island. However, it is very important to keep in mind that our data on this subject is really limited. As I said before, the student that goes in the RANS, they only say if there is waste or not, and they don't actually count the waste. So it will be very interesting for the next expedition to actually count the waste at the station, and also it could be interesting to try and harvest the micro waste too. Like that, we could have a better and more precise idea of the actual situation at Les Lens and the impact of waste on the biodiversity. Thank you very much.
So regarding the other study you are talking about, and you compare your data with some Mediterranean study and world study.
Yes.
So do you know where this other study has been done exactly? Is it far from the shore, close to the shore?
Yes, it was between 30 and 800 meters.
Yeah,
We have the source.
for the depth, but we don't really know about the distance from the shore. We
Yeah.
didn't really check it, but it was between 30 and 800
and
meters.
800
Yeah.
meters. The sources is on
One was
Secretariat of the
yeah.
Convention of Biological Diversity,
Oh, no.
which itself use sources from different expeditions.
Because in your conclusion, you mentioned a quite strong sentence that there is more plastic in